Okay, we're live. It says, let me make sure we're on the, can everybody see us? Just want to be sure, just somebody type in the chat yes for me, because it's giving me a weird.
Because Nan can't see chat.
Is everyone able to see? Somebody, anybody? Yes, okay, they can see us.
Okay.
Fantastic. So everybody, I'm super excited. I'm like a high school girl excited because these are two of my favorite people in the assisted reproduction space. First of all, full disclosure, Dr. D is my doctor. So that's one thing. She's an incredible reproductive endocrinologist and OBGyn actually. Based in Los Angeles. She is the owner and operator of CMD Fertility. And she is beloved by her patients, beloved, I tell you. And another beloved person is Nanette Bahl, who is an art clinician. She's been in the business for over 3 decades. So she's seen it all. And this is why I wanted the two of them to have this conversation that I think is very important, because I think that this is a time when we're kind of reimagining what family looks like. And Dr. Amy addressed it a little bit earlier, but we're at a time when, you know, a lot of women are engaging their fertility at a later date. And sometimes, not all the time, and I'm definitely not canceling hope and not canceling the importance of taking care of your body and monitoring your egg health. But sometimes it's just not a possibility to use your own eggs. It's not a possibility to carry your own child. And we're at a point in history where it is more possible than ever to have interventions in those areas and to get help for women who are interested in having children on their own and perhaps using maybe a sperm donor. Those are all options that are becoming more commonplace. And I think just kind of reimagining how we're building our families, the choices that we're making as women, it's an important conversation. So I wanted both Dr. D, Dr. DeUgarte, and Nan to have this conversation from both the medical and emotional and mental wellness standpoint and cultural standpoint. So we're gonna hop in. Dr. D wanted to introduce us to somebody first, and I will let her do that.
Sorry, I didn't cut off for a second. Did you want to?
Are you introducing us to Emma?
Oh, sure. Yes. So this is Emma. Emma's training to be a therapy, a fertility doggy. She has helped lots of women have babies. Unfortunately, because of COVID, she's somewhat restricted in what she can do now, but she is still taking notes and attending your conference here to learn more and try to be a good support for my patients. So she's been a good part of the journey, and she's been part of keeping my mental sanity during these past few months. It's been great having her.
I think a lot of people with pets feel that way. I wanted to start, Nan, for you to add some context in the history of, I know that you were at USC back in the day when they first started using egg donors. Tell us a little bit about what things were like then versus what they're like now.
Well, just some of the fun facts. So the first birth using donor eggs was actually in Australia. And that was in 1983. And in the United States, in February of 1984, we had our first birth, and it was in California. So I think about this, Ashley, that it's perfect that Claire, you gave birth to Claire in California. So actually it was some doctors at UCLA, Dr. John Buster, who's considered the grandfather of egg donation, Maria Bustillo, who is considered the grandmother of ovum donation, and their fellow at the time was Dr. Mark Sauer. And their embryologist, one of them, I don't know why I drew a blank, but one of them is Thelma Micasso, which you know very well through me. So that is, that started where I fell in love with actually reading about it and loved it. But when I first started, I started on the animals. because the culture medium had to be tested. They needed mice embryos to do that with. I'm the one who injected the mice with the hormones, put them into breed, dissected them to take the oviducts off of their fallopian tubes and take them in to test our media. Culture medium doesn't need that anymore. It comes already tested for us, so we've evolved there.
So you know what? I want to ask a question.
Yep.
That being said, so we talked a little bit about the history. Dr. D, just interjecting here, at which point do you generally recommend start to talk to a patient about using an egg donor? What are some of the signs where you'll say this is something that we should look at?
So good question. Nobody comes to my office unless it's a same-sex couple who are males who comes and says, I want an egg donor. Everybody, pretty much 99.99% of my patients are not excited about using an egg donor initially. They really want to try to use their genetics as much as we can. And we do every last effort, even if they have 1 or 2 eggs, we really, really try. And I'm very realistic with my patients, but we at least try it to see if we can. And I had a patient this week who only had, 1 egg. So, and hopefully that will result in a baby. And I've seen that before. I've had my miracle babies, but I'm also very realistic and tell them that sometimes if that doesn't work, then at some point it is time to discuss using a donor. Obviously, it has to be the age. After 45, it's very unlikely that somebody gets pregnant with their own eggs. I only have 1 patient that's a 46 that delivered with her own eggs. Everybody else has been under 46, but I do have 1 46-year-old that has delivered. She was delivered actually at 47. So definitely after 45, I think it's a better idea. Do I have 45-year-olds who try to get pregnant with their own eggs? I've had up to 48-year-olds who tried with their own eggs. Again, I have only had a 46-year-old who was successful. But in terms of trials, and nobody knows how many tries do you try before moving on to an egg donor. I've had patients try once and then they're just emotionally exhausted and they just really want the best chance out there. And I've had patients try, up to 10 times before they're ready to move on to an egg donor. So really it's dependent on their situations, their ovarian reserve. Also, sometimes they have to use an egg donor because of genetic reasons. For example, if they carry genetic mutations and they don't want to go through the genetic diagnosis technology. For example, somebody with Huntington's disease, for example, who doesn't want their kids to have it. They don't want to pursue genetic testing to prevent that from happening, which you can do. But we do try to use their eggs as much as we can before going to the egg donor option.
Got it. So Nan, kind of piggybacking on that, as the touch point for a lot of patients when they're, so for instance, and so this makes a little bit more sense in context for all of you guys. Dr. D is a doctor. She would say that. And then Nan in her role would be the person who's that touch point in the office for the patient and kind of the liaison between the patient and the doctor, so patient coordination, all of that. So Nan, you deal with a lot of the emotional and mental engagement around this. How do you do that? What are those conversations like?
Well, they're difficult. And I always feel if they have somebody, if they have a partner that they're going through with, that's helpful. But for the single patient, it's difficult. So you actually become their support throughout their entire cycle with them, traveling, recommending everything. I believe in Eastern medicine and Western medicine make a great blend. So acupuncture, yoga, some yin yoga for relaxation, meditation, counseling, and having available to them several different psychologists that they could speak to if they want to. It's difficult, but they get through, and they, they come from seeing Dr. D, so they've already, but when they come to you, they know what they're expecting, and you just have to deal with the reality of it. At that point, they're ready to, go forward and look at agencies, or if you have a donor bank in the office, they're ready to look at donors.
Got it. Dr. D, I want to ask you a similar question in terms of surrogates, because I know that's a bit different. We're talking about a different organ there. At which point what are some of the warning signs or some of the primary causes, I should say, for your patients needing to use a surrogate to carry their child?
So usually for my patient population is patients who have tried with uterus, who, for example, have had multiple miscarriages or implantation failure, where you do workup and there's just no good reason why they're not getting pregnant, even though you're putting in normal embryos. So in some of those patients, they've gotten successful with using a surrogate. I have patients who are born without a uterus, who obviously from a medical standpoint, they need to, for example, Mullerian-Rokitansky-Kuster syndrome, where you're actually born without a uterus, is one of the syndromes that can be a case where you absolutely need to use a surrogate because you just don't have one. Or patients who have really complicated pregnancies. For example, patients who have really bad C-sections with a lot of scarring, with bowel issues, or patients who have severe nausea and vomiting to the point that they're hospitalized for 9 months. And so medically, or they have heart issues and they just can't deliver another baby from a medical standpoint. Those are other issues that I see in my practice. And obviously, again, same-sex or using a donor and a surrogate in those cases as well.
Got it. And I want to understand this a little bit better, because I think this is something on the minds of a lot of people here, at least with some of the names that I see. Can you both, I'd love to hear from both of you, explain a little bit about how the protocol for a donor might differ from an intended parents? So, because you have a lot of intended parents who have been through, multiple cycles, and they're used to doing really high dosages of medication, or, having to do things to improve egg quality. What are the differences that a donor in the donor's protocol, and then Nan, for you, how you're engaging the donor as well?
So from a medical standpoint, a donor will require usually half the medications that one patient over 40 will require. And I try to get records on the donors. Some donors require more medications than others, because I feel like if a donor's had 4 cycles before, you go through all those cycles, and I'm a very big advocate of reviewing the records and figure out what's the best dose for the donor so that you get enough eggs for the couple without having the donor at risk. Because my main priority when using an egg donor is, number one, and I tell my donors this, I tell my patients this, is I want to keep that donor safe. She's amazing for giving her eggs to my patients, and I want to keep her healthy. I want to keep her out of the hospital, especially now with COVID. I don't want to get her to get hyperstimulation syndrome. So my number 1 goal is to keep her healthy. My number 2 goal is to have my patients have a baby, because again, I want to keep her healthy. And so with that said, we monitor them with ultrasounds, and we want to make sure we don't overdo it. And we do something called a Lupron trigger, which, since I've been in practice now for 50 years, Nan will probably tell you, I think this has been one of the things that's been revolutionary for donors, is using Lupron triggers and having them just feel so much better after the retrievals and not have hyperstimulation syndrome like they used to before we had the Lupron trigger available.
I love the Lupron trigger. I absolutely love the Lupron trigger, and I give my personal cell phone number to the donors and to the surrogates.
Yes, you do, to your own detriment.
So I'm with them, whether they're driving me, bonkers at 3 a.m. or midnight, but I'm there to help them. But in the last almost 2 years, only Lupron trigger, and then Dostonex, 5 small little tablets of Dostonex, starting with the first pill once a day, starting with egg retrieval. I'm sold on it. I love it. I don't know if you're using that, Dr. D, but this protocol I've not had in 2 years anybody have any difficulties post retrieval.
And I appreciate you.
I don't give Dostinex to everybody. I individualize it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I definitely use it in some of the donors who have higher estrogen levels and high egg numbers.
Yes.
The problem with
Yes.
Dostinex, sometimes it can cause nausea. So,
and
so I don't give
dizziness.
it to everybody.
Yeah.
There you go. Dr. D, I want to say I appreciate you saying that, because when I donated 10 years ago, I did hyperstimulate. I was given too much medication. So I think that's important too. You want to make sure that you're doing it safely. It was super uncomfortable. And so, yeah, being sensitive to that is the, sign of an amazing physician. What is one major change that you've seen in the years regarding how patients engage this? And I know, Dr. D, you were saying that nobody comes in saying, hey, I want to use an egg donor unless there's something pre-existing that dictates that they do that. But do you both feel that this is something that people are coming to sooner than they once did? Is it whereas that maybe there were multiple cycles in the past and now people are just kind of resigned to it and patients are coming to it a little quicker?
Yes, I think people are also older nowadays. I think I have patients who show up for the first time in my office and they are 44, 45, 46 when they first come into a fertility office, and they come to me and they're like, I think I'm ready to have a baby now. And so, and so I do have the discussion with them even before they've even tried that, it's possible that you can get pregnant with your own eggs, but just so you know, if it doesn't work out, there is the option of an egg donor. And some patients have just do the work up, and if they're not, you have a lot of eggs, they do move on to go sooner than before. I think because there's a lot more awareness out there, a lot of people in Hollywood. Before, you would see everybody on People magazine, surprise baby at 48, but I think now more and more patients, celebrities have come out saying they've used egg donors, they've used surrogates. So I think it's a lot more accepted out there. And I know in my kids' schools, there's a lot of patients who've used IVF. Some of them are my patients, but in terms of I see them, and my kids are very aware of patients that have two mommies, two daddies, or their friends who've been through egg donors and surrogates, because patients are pretty honest with their kids.
And your daughter's going to be a doctor too, so I mean, there's that. She know these things.
She did come home one
take
day
your job.
And she said, "I think this person in my school, her mom must have used an egg donor." So
I love that.
Age. So I love just picking that on that already.
I love that. That's wonderful. Oh,
Nan, what about you? What are you seeing from your end? And you are on the East Coast now. You're from California. You worked in California most of your life. You're in Connecticut now. What is your take on how quickly people are engaging the idea of using the egg donor or surrogate?
well, they're older and they're coming in, and they already know by the time they're coming in that this is what they need to do. So that's and you know what? What's nice is the success rate using donor eggs now is over 60%. So I mean, it's they are going to achieve their goal. I mean, maybe not the first time, but they are going to achieve their goal. And I think that's wonderful. So
absolutely. Yeah. Dr. D, at what point would you, in an extreme case, I'm just curious, at what point would you cut a patient off if they were just kind of like still trying out? How many cycles? Is there a number where you would say, okay, this is probably not going to be successful with their own eggs?
I don't think you can go by number of cycles because everybody's different. For example, if somebody does a cycle and they have 10 embryos and let's say they 5 of them made it to testing and they're all abnormal, I wouldn't cut them off, because just because they had one bad cycle doesn't mean another bad cycle. However, if there's a person that comes and you try medications and nothing's working, like they don't even grow one egg, you can't even squeeze one egg out of those ovaries, then those are the situations that I would talk about moving to an egg donor sooner. The other thing that's also come in the past 5 years that's been available to my patients that wasn't before is the option of using frozen eggs that are available now, especially in the time of COVID. Sometimes that's much better because you don't have to fly the donor from other states. You don't have to worry about the donor getting COVID in the middle of the circulation. And the donor eggs, while there's less of them than fresh eggs and less choices, they're already there. So I think for patients who are, for example, 46 and just want one more baby, I think frozen eggs, and I've had many born from frozen donor eggs, is a much less expensive and easier and quicker options, especially with COVID now.
That's great. I hadn't even thought about that with COVID. That just adds another layer.
It's really difficult.
Someone asked a question here. Can your general gynecologist tell you how many eggs or healthy eggs that you have? And Dr. Amy addressed this a bit earlier, but I'll have you answer it, Dr. D.
Yes, and I think more and more gynecologists, especially the young ones, are doing that in their office. They're doing something called an antral follicle count, which really you can do at any point in the cycle to count how many follicles somebody has, and doing the FSH, E2, and AMH levels, just like Dr. Amy was rapping them earlier. So those are the levels, and I think I am seeing more gynecologists do that. There's something called an ovarian assessment report, which gives you a cute little graph to tell you how many eggs you might have if you do a retrieval. So I think more and more doctors are doing that in their offices, and I'm getting some of the referrals from these doctors that are checking these levels and finding low AMH levels, and I call it amine hormone because AMH is low in a lot of women, and so they send them over for further discussion about fertility preservation, which I think is a good idea. What I don't like is there are some OBGYNs out there who have patients who are 40 and they come for like 6 months of infertility. They say, why don't you try another year? They don't check any hormones. They just put them on Clomid. They don't check any sperm testing. And that drives me like 40. Really, a year is a long time to waste.
And that being said, actually, since you say that, is there an age that you think it's kind of, you shouldn't even worry about having that conversation necessarily with your gynecologist, but you need to see an REI just kind of right away if you're ready to have a baby? Is there an age that you say you should see an REI first?
Well, I think if the OBGYN is good and they're willing to do the testing, I don't think people have to go directly to the REI. And also depends on how many children somebody wants. If somebody is 29 and they want one child, then I think they're okay to not freeze their eggs right away. But I always recommend, even in early 30s, get evaluated, get your fertility tested, and especially knowing how many eggs you want, putting some on ice, especially for long term. And unfortunately, a lot of people do change their minds. I just had a patient who's a doctor this week who said, I wasn't ready for a kid, and now I'm 41 and I'm ready. And so what should I do? And she's never even tried to get pregnant, but she wants 2 kids. So in her case, I probably would recommend doing fertility testing, freezing some embryos for baby number 2, and trying to get pregnant either naturally or with help for baby number 1.
Makes sense. Someone asks here, what odds would you say for a 44-year-old using her own eggs? Try again before the 45-year train comes by. I think I know how you'll answer that, Dr. D, but yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, the chance of getting pregnant at 44 naturally is somewhere around 1 to 2%. And with IVF, I would say that if you're lucky enough to have a normal embryo, in fact, I'm talking to one of my patients who had that at 44, now she's 46, wants baby number 2. If you have one normal embryo, you could have a 30-40% chance of getting pregnant with that embryo. But that's if you have a normal embryo. It may take 3 or 4 cycles to give me a normal embryo so I can put it in to my patient. So it depends on follicle count, depends on, again, AMH, FSH levels, and quality of eggs.
That's big, 30 to 40%. Wow.
If you have a normal
you
look at the START data,
that's the big part there.
If you look at the START data, I think it's 6% for all 44-year-olds for chance of getting pregnant with IVF.
Awesome. Nan, you work, like you said, very closely with donors and surrogates. What would you say is, well, I wanted to ask kind of like what that experience is like from their experience. I know I've been a donor, but it was someone that I knew and, a client and friend. But for most donors and surrogates, kind of almost, you are almost like an agency in the office sometimes.
Yeah.
So in the doctor's office, can you describe a little bit about what working with them is like and what the mentality is like?
They're extremely stressed now because of COVID. So I would say since last March, the whole atmosphere has changed a lot, but not enough to stop them from coming in. But you do need to be very supportive of them, because I think their fear of the traveling, for those that have to travel. We do have, where I am now, we do have our in-house donor bank, and they live in Connecticut, the majority of them, maybe a couple in New York, but still close enough so it's not a long travel, and they're in their own car. But you have donors that will keep coming back and wanting to do more than 5 or 6 cycles, and and Michael, I have a lot of new time donors, and I haven't had that for a long time, and so my goal, because these are coming from an agency, is to make sure that their cycle is so perfect that they will consider donating again. So, when they leave, they've been comfortable throughout from the beginning to the end of their cycle, and that they would consider donating to somebody else again to help them begin a family building. So just always interacting with them all the time. So when I have to look down, it's because my donors and surrogates are texting me, and I already, said to them what I was doing today, and
Yeah, can you please ask them? Can we just have a little bit of your time? I know they want all of it, just a little bit.
And they know this, and it's like, okay, really? I told you I'd be in touch with you later. So, but it's
Dr.
okay.
D, we do have a question here from somebody I haven't seen in years, and I had no idea she was going to be here, which is wonderful. She said, with a single frozen embryo left from a prior IVF cycle, would you suggest PG, which is now PGTA? And she said she worries about the thawing and freezing, and I think that's a common concern. What are your thoughts?
If it's just one embryo and it looks good, I probably, and there's no history of miscarriages, I would just probably put it in without doing genetic testing, because I think it's a lot to go through to unfreeze it, refreeze it, and then I would just probably put it in if it's just one embryo. Got it.
Was that helpful? Does anyone else have questions? I know this is kind of, some of the questions are not necessarily... Oh, okay, we do have another one, but just so everybody knows, doesn't necessarily have to be about the third-party assisted. I know some people still have leftover questions about their own, so feel free. Do you insist on embryo testing for all women over 40 using their own eggs? Dr. D, I'm sorry.
I think it's optional for all my patients. Yeah, no worries. I do offer it to everybody. I would say probably about 75 to 80% of my patients over 40 are doing the testing right now. And I think it makes a lot of sense if patients want a baby number 2, especially if they're over 40, because, for example, if you have 4 embryos and you have them frozen and tucked away for the future, and let's say you get pregnant with 1 and you have 3 left, 2 years down the line, you'll be 42, 43 when you're ready for the others. And what if they're all abnormal? Then you're 2 years older to make new embryos at that time. It's a lot more challenging to find normal embryos. So especially from the baby number 2 standpoint, I think it's a good idea to know, because 2 years later is a lot harder to get pregnant.
That makes a lot of sense. And just so everybody knows, since we're now talking about testing a little bit more, the very next session following this one is with a genetic counselor from Invitae. So she will be able to answer some of these questions as well, in terms of carrier testing and genetic testing on embryos. So there's that. Is there anything that the two of you would like to add? I want to kind of open the floor for you as well.
I just wanted to add one more thing again, I've been doing this for a while, and something that's been newer that I didn't have to tell patients before, but I do it now. Patients who are using donors is, consider, first of all, tell your kid at some point in the future. I think it's a good idea because somehow it does come out, and I think it's better for the child to find out from the parents. So I encourage them to talk to psychologists about it. If they're using their sister's eggs, I encourage them to just, have that relationship where they The sister won't get mad and say, hey, you're actually my egg. It's very important for the kid not to do that. And also, if they are using an anonymous donor, to know that now with all the genetic testing, such as all the companies out there, 23andMe, people can track kids down. And so your kid can now do, Ancestry.com and find out that if you don't tell her or him that they're not genetically related to you, and that has happened out there. And obviously it's a hard thing to find out if it doesn't come from the parents.
And I will add, and I know Nan will parrot me here, and we do need to tie up, but just so everybody is aware, when you're working with an egg donor, if you're using a reputable agency or outlet, you'll have a legal agreement. So it's not about them coming to take your child. They don't have parental rights, but that doesn't stop people, as Dr. D is saying here, from being able to, to meet them and knowing that they have a connection to other people. So I do think that's a really important point with all of the ways that we learn about being interconnected.
And somebody just got married to their sperm donor recently.
Really?
Yeah, they found out, and then they met and they fell in love, and so yeah.
That's interesting. I've not heard that one, but there is a donor registry that, Ashley, that both the sperm donors and egg donors can sign up on, and there are even siblings meeting siblings through that registry. So even though we're supposed to be just anonymous now, because when I first started, everything was non-anonymous. Everybody knew everybody, and but now that has changed a lot.
I actually find that wonderful, but
I do too.
that's a whole point. That's a whole point of view.
Whole discussion.
We have to tie up. I want to thank you both so much. Your expertise and your heart for this is incredible, and I know that everybody is so appreciative of everything here. I dropped the link for Dr. D's practice into the chat, so please look it up. There's a way to contact her there as well. I have several friends they're going through cycles with her, and she's amazing. Her patients will tell you. So
she is amazing.
Take a look at that.
Thank you guys are amazing.
It's good to see you, Dr. D.
Thank you, and thank Emma for us, please.
Yes,
I will. She's still here with us.
She's really so quiet.
She is. So everybody, in those genes, with the genetic counselor starts in just a couple minutes. So just hang tight.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.